Hello and welcome to my new channel, The Headlines with Greg. Every video we will look at a new article and I'll help you understand it in clear and simple English. In this particular video we're going to look at an article by Nicola Davies from The Guardian. That's a UK newspaper. I believe The Guardian does have other newspapers in other countries too, for example in Australia where I am. I will take the news articles from various sources, but I will probably stay away from the more sensitive newspaper stories. Those stories can change very quickly, or they can have a lot of disagreement between the opinions in them. I will stick more to things like science, nutrition, and things like that. If you have any suggestions, please let me know. Anyway, let's get on with the first video. Let's read this one together. Tongue twisters could be used to gauge alcohol intoxication levels, study finds. Now, let's just break down that intro. It's an interesting way of writing grammar. You wouldn't normally speak like that, but they put that word, study finds, at the end of the sentence because it's not the most interesting part of that sentence. The most interesting part of the sentence is, of course, about tongue twisters. If we were to say that sentence normally, we would say a study has found, or many studies find that tongue twisters, and then carried on. But of course we want to start with the most interesting part, which is the tongue twisters. So they put that little bit of grammar, the study finds part, at the end. But it's not a normal way of speaking, so I wouldn't suggest it just yet. It's quite advanced. Tongue twisters. Tongue twisters are an interesting thing. But let's go through that vocabulary first. A tongue twister is a difficult sentence to say, something that people use to practice particular sounds or particular combinations, similar sounds, and you practice it using a tongue twister to help you practice those sounds. Could be used to gauge alcohol intoxication levels. Well, in this situation, gauge means to try to understand. So for example, if you said something to someone that could be confusing for them, or maybe a little bit upsetting or interesting, something that makes them feel something different, when you say it to them, you would try to gauge, try to understand the level or the difference in what you're saying on them. So to gauge means to understand, to try to understand something. Alcohol intoxication. Now we will be doing a lot of this, talking about alcohol in this. Intoxicate, it comes from the word toxic, meaning not good for you, something like poison. Intoxication means that you have consumed a lot of that alcohol and it's actually affected you a lot. Method could be used to stop people from unlocking cars or to support bartenders serving alcohol. Okay, well let's continue. Tongue twister. So I said that I would explain what a tongue twister is, and I'll give you an example. Here, let me try this one. Ready? I have to read it though, because I can't quite remember it. Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. A peck of pickled peppers Peter Piper picked. If Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers, where's the peck of pickled peppers Peter Piper picked? Oh, I think I did that quite well, although I could practice it to try and make it a little bit faster. If you want to try it, press the pause and keep practicing that one. Of course, in this situation, the sound that they are focusing on is P, the P sound, Peter Piper. And of course, the goal is to try to say it as quickly as possible without making a mistake. What is a peck of pickled peppers? It doesn't really matter. I imagine it means sort of a collection of them. But in reality, lots of these tongue twisters are quite old and you don't really need to know what they mean unless you're super interested. But the main goal is to practice speaking them. I'll try one more time. Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. A peck of pickled pipe. See, I made a mistake there. I think I need to practice myself. Okay, let's keep going. Gauge. As I said, it means to measure, quantify, or to understand. Intoxication, to be under the influence of a drug or alcohol. That's another phrase, an interesting phrase, to be under the influence. So that drug or alcohol is influencing your behavior or your decision-making skills, which of course when driving is not a very good thing to do. So tongue twisters could be used to gauge alcohol intoxication levels, study finds. Method could be used to stop people from unlocking cars or to help bartenders serving alcohol. Participants were given a large weight-based dose of alcohol and subsequently asked to recite a tongue twister each hour, up to 7 hours after consuming alcohol. Now there's some tricky words in that text. Let's just go through them fairly quickly. Participants, the people who participated, who took part in this study, were given a large weight-based dose. Now dosed simply is used particularly with medicine. It's a quantity, an amount. And a weight-based amount, well, they weighed it on some scales to find out how much it weighed. And everybody I think was given the same amount. And subsequently, it's a very fancy word for next or then, asked to recite a tongue twister. In this case, recite means to say or to speak. A tongue twister each hour, up to 7 hours after consuming alcohol. Oops. Whether it is true, whether it is the story of Peter Piper and his pickled peppers, which we already discussed, or a woman selling seashells on the seashore, tongue twisters tackled when sober can sound rather different after a drink. Now, researchers believe such changes, in particular those relating to pitch and frequency, could be used to alert people to their level of intoxication. One more time. Whether it is the story of Peter Piper and his pickled peppers, or a woman selling seashells, it's difficult as well, on the seashore, tongue twisters tackled when sober can sound rather different after a drink. Well, as I just demonstrated, even when sober, so even when you have not been drinking alcohol, like now, it's the morning, even when sober, tongue twisters can be difficult. But you can imagine after drinking alcohol, tongue twisters could be a lot more difficult. Now researchers believe such changes, that level of difficulty between not having a drink and having a drink, relating to changes in particular those relating to pitch and frequency, could be used to alert or to warn people, to make people aware of how much alcohol they've actually drunk. Pitch and frequency, pretty much the how fast or how high they're speaking. Dr. Brian Suffoletto, the author of a study from Stanford University, said the approach has a number of potential future applications. The most obvious one is a form of ignition lock on cars which would not allow someone to start their car unless they could pass the voice challenge, which could be used in certain high-risk workplaces like school bus driver or heavy machine operator to ensure public safety. Let's go through some of those words in the text. Potential future applications. Potential meaning possible in the future, things that could happen. The most obvious one is a form of ignition lock on cars. Now, for those of you who have not driven a car or do not know the vocabulary around cars, the ignition is where you put your key. When you get in the car and you want to start the engine, you put your key in the ignition and you turn it and it starts the engine. Now, if we had an ignition lock on the car, maybe we would have to say a tongue twister and the app on the car would analyze your speech and it would either it would say yes, you can start the engine, or it would not allow you to start the engine. There would be a lock on it. Pass the voice challenge, which could be used in certain high-risk workplaces. Another application could be in restaurants or bars, so a bartender can know when to cut someone off, as in when to stop them from being served or when to stop serving them alcohol. Writing in the Journal of Studies on Alcohol and Drugs, Suffoletto and colleagues report how 18 adults aged 21 and over were initially recorded reciting a tongue twister. Each participant was then given a large, weight-based dose of alcohol, enough to intoxicate them, and subsequently asked to recite a different tongue twister each hour, up to 7 hours after consuming the alcohol. This speech was recorded. Okay, so they recorded them first before the drinks. Then they had some drinks. They had that weight-based dose, a certain amount that they'd given everyone to drink. And then every hour, up to 7 hours after, they were recording that tongue twister. Suffoletto said the tongue twister was used as a kind of vocal stress test to bring out changes that might not be detected when speaking routine prose. That's a very strange phrase, routine prose. Prose in this situation just means normal speech. So routine prose just means things that they would normally say, just the way they normally speak. The researchers also took breath alcohol readings from participants before they consumed the drink and every 30 minutes afterwards until the 7-hour post-drink point. The recordings of the rhymes were split into 1-second windows, and the features of the voice relating to pitch and frequency were analysed. An AI system was then trained on a subset of this data with the corresponding breath alcohol concentrations before it was tested using the remaining voice data. Now there's a lot of stuff going on there. It sounds more complicated than it really is. Let's just read that last paragraph. The recordings of the rhymes, so those tongue twisters, the rhymes, rhyming words, like cat, hat, and mat, were split into 1-second windows, so they were divided into these little parcels of time, and the features of the voice relating to pitch and frequency were analysed, just like it said earlier. An AI system was then trained, an artificial intelligence system was trained on a subset of this data with the corresponding breath alcohol concentrations. So that alcohol in your breath that they recorded, they somehow, even I don't really understand it, but I understand that they looked at this data from the breath alcohol and they looked at this data from the voice and pitch, and they put them together and found out how intoxicated that person was at that time of speech. The results suggest the voice analysis predicted alcohol intoxication with 98% accuracy, with intoxication defined as a breath alcohol concentration equal of more than 0.08%, the legal blood alcohol limit in the US for driving. The study has limitations, however, including that it only included white participants and did not look at other features of speech that may be influenced by alcohol, such as its volume. Suffoletto added that use of harm prevention messaging also requires careful timing. For instance, as someone initiates drinking, a reminder of their consumption limits can be impactful. However, once they are significantly intoxicated, the efficacy of such interventions diminishes, he said. Now, there's a lot of confusing things here, particularly in that last paragraph, so let's look at it together. The results suggest a very, very high accuracy, okay, which is very good. The study has limitations, so there are things that the study is not so good on, and that includes that it only included white participants. It didn't look at people of other races, and it did not look at other features of speech that may be influenced by alcohol, such as its volume. So it was quite specifically focused on one area. Suffoletto added that use of harm prevention messaging also requires careful timing. For instance, as someone initiates drinking or starts to initiate drinking, a reminder of their consumption, of their drinking limits, can be impactful. So, in short, if they get this message early when they start drinking, it will be very useful for them. However, once they are significantly intoxicated, so after they have drunk a lot of alcohol, the efficacy, the usefulness, let's say, of such interventions, like this message, diminishes or reduces. So pretty much, if they get the message early, it's going to be a useful message. However, if this message comes later, after they started drinking, it's not going to be that useful. Presumably, after they've started drinking, they'll stop listening to reason, they'll stop understanding what is good and bad, and this message will be kind of a pointless message for them. Efficacy. Let's look at this word, the ability to produce a desired or intended result. So yeah, how useful something is, or how much it will produce a useful result. Petra Meyer, Professor of Public Health at the University of Glasgow, who was not involved in the research, stressed the study was small and had tightly controlled conditions. I think we understood that already. They only looked at one type of people and they were only looking at one specific thing. So maybe it needs more research. I believe that there is the potential for exciting developments that could eventually be really useful. But obviously one would first want to test this approach in larger and more diverse samples, more different people. She said, adding it would then be important to test the approach in real-life situations. Meyer said, for example, to check that it works equally well for light drinkers and for heavy, and for regular heavy drinkers who may not show vocal changes until they reach much higher levels of intoxication, might be wrongly reassured they are fine to drive. Well, that's an interesting point, isn't it? If you are someone who drinks often, then maybe you have a higher tolerance level. You are able to take more alcohol before you start showing signs of being drinking, or signs of intoxication. That's the best word here, yeah, of drinking alcohol. So it would affect the people who don't drink often more than it would affect the people who do drink often. What problems can you see with this idea? Put them in the comments below. I think really it's an interesting idea and it could be useful, but it really depends on the person or on different people. There are just too many different factors with people who have issues with speech. The program might recognize it as being intoxication when in fact they are sober. I think there might be many more problems. Is this a good idea? I guess anything is a good idea when we're trying to stop people drinking and driving. If you have a different idea to that, let me know. And Greg, last question. Can we practice a tongue twister together? Of course we can. This will be good fun. Here is a woodchuck. Now in England we call it something different, but in America they call it a woodchuck. I've totally forgotten, but I think we call it a gopher or a marmot in England. But it's irrelevant. As I said, it's not important what we call it. This is purely here. This is really here just so that we can practice our pronunciation. So let's give this one a go. How much wood would a woodchuck chuck? See, I've said it wrong already. Let's try again. How much wood could a woodchuck chuck if a woodchuck could chuck wood? As much wood as a woodchuck could chuck if a woodchuck could chuck wood. Now, in this situation, we're talking about a woodchuck, which is this little animal, and it's chucking or throwing some wood. And it's a question first. It's a hypothetical question asking how much this little creature could throw if it could. Now, presumably it can't throw big chunks of wood. And then it's giving the answer saying, well, it would throw as much as it could throw if it was actually able to, which it's not. And then we're supposed to say it very quickly. So I'll try it one more time. Here we go. How much wood could a woodchuck chuck if a woodchuck could chuck wood? As much wood as a woodchuck could chuck if a woodchuck could chuck wood. I don't think that was too bad, was it? So definitely practice those if you can. Now there are many more tongue twisters that you can practice on the internet. Just type in on Google tongue twisters in English and you'll find lots that you can practice. Well, I hope that video was useful and that you learned some new vocabulary along the way. And I look forward to taking a new news article and going through it together with you. All the best. See you next time. Bye.